You got all these things you spend your money on before you even sell a single copy of your book, sometimes before you even write the book. How do you deduct those on your taxes and when do you do it? This falls under startup costs. So we're going to talk about what those expenses are, when you get to deduct those on your taxes, and how to do it. It's more complicated than it really should be, but we're going to make it simple for you. Also, one day I'm going to pick a background and stick with it. Today is not that day though. So what are startup costs? Startup costs are anything that you would normally get to deduct in your business, but you can't yet because you haven't actually started the business yet. In general, the IRS lets you deduct any of your ordinary and necessary business expenses, but you have to actively be in business in order to deduct those. So what happens before you're actively in business, and when does that actually happen? When do you become actively in business? Let's talk about the what first. What kind of expenses are we talking about? We're talking about anything that you need in order to get the business going. This could be research for the book to an extent. Check out the last video for research costs. This could be buying ISBNs, setting up websites. This could be maybe setting up your business, your Secretary of State stuff if you're doing an LLC. Any of those things are considered startup costs if they're in pursuant to starting the business. So if you already have a good handle on the types of things that you would normally get to deduct in an author business, then it would be those things. It's just that you can't necessarily deduct them yet because business hasn't started. If you're not sure what those things are, go look at the channel. There is a tax deductions for authors video somewhere in there. The biggest question with all this is, when do we get to deduct these expenses? The IRS says that you get to deduct them when business begins. But like, when does business actually begin for an author? Is it when you make your first sale, or is it somewhere before or after them? There's actually a lot of court cases on this. And the common theme across all of them is, if you're actively promoting your business, if people can buy things from you, even if they haven't bought anything yet, then you're technically in business. You have to be doing the things that would look like you're in business, and you have to be doing them regularly. So it's not enough just to throw up a website with a purchase now link if you're not actually like trying to get people to go to that website. But if you're trying to get a publisher, and so you're actively seeking someone out to like read your manuscript or give you an advance, if you're going to be selling direct and you have your website set up and you're taking pre-orders, or even if you haven't received any pre-orders, you're at least pushing the book and you're at least promoting it, then you could be considered actively in business, as long as you're doing this like regularly and consistently. So whenever that happens, you're considered in business. If you're just still writing the book, you haven't set up a website, you haven't listed anything on Amazon, you're not seeking out an advance or a publisher or anything like that, then I would say you're not actively in business yet. How do we deduct these costs? These are going to fall into two separate buckets, and these are going to be organizational costs on one hand and actual startup cost in the other. So your organizational costs would be things like your Secretary of State filing fees, anything else that you have to actually start and organize the business. If you have set up an actual business like an LLC or an S Corp or a partnership or something like that. The other bucket, just your regular startup costs, would be things like research expenses, education expenses, small supplies, ISBNs, editors, cover designs, things like that. So with each of these buckets of expenses, you can deduct up to $5,000 of those costs in the year that you officially start your business. If you had $2,000 of startup costs and $2,000 of organization expenses, then you can deduct $4,000 total because each one has its own $5,000 cap. If you had $6,000 in startup costs and $2,000 of organizational expenses, you can deduct $5,000 of those startup costs and the full $2,000 of organization expenses because you have that $5,000 cap on each of them. I guess theoretically you could have $10,000 of costs between the two of them if you have more than $5,000 in each, but chances are you're not going to have more than $5,000 of organizational costs, because even if you just like set up an LLC or something, it's going to cost you a few $100 for the Secretary of State, and really that's it. But for the startup cost, the other costs, you could very well have more than $5,000 of cost to deduct. So then what do you do if you hit that $5,000 ceiling and you have more things to deduct above that? You have to amortize that over 15 years. That's just a fancy way of saying you spread the additional expense out over 15 years. So let's just say you had $6,500 of startup costs. You would deduct the first $5,000 in the year that business begins, and then the other $1,500 would be spread out over the next 15 years, and you would deduct $100 a year on that. Hey, editor note here. I don't want it to sound like you can only ever deduct $5,000 of your cost per year. After you start the business, like after the official start date, you can deduct all your costs every year as long as they're true business costs. There's no like $5,000 cap on that. It's just the things that you spend money on before you start your business or before it's officially open for business that you have to, I guess, just accumulate. And you can only deduct 5,000 of those in the year you start the business, and everything above that $5,000 mark has to be spread over 15 years. After that first year, or after you start your business, all the cost after that date can be deducted in the year that you spend the money. All right, now back to the show. Now, things like your initial inventory that you might be buying or large expenses like computers and things like that, they're going to fall under a whole different category and be treated differently. I'll do a separate video for those. But just keep in mind that business doesn't begin until you're actively promoting your book and you have a way for people to pay you. And up until that point, start separating your cost out into those organizational costs and startup costs and track what those are. You might be spending money over the course of a few years, depending on how early you're getting started. So make sure that you don't lose out on those deductions just because you didn't keep track of what those were. If you have specific questions that you'd like me to cover in one of these videos, let me know in the comments. And otherwise, I'll see you next time.